Good evening, and welcome to the latest edition of the Spy Report. I'm Dave Wheelan, publisher and editor of the Talbot Spy, and this is our second installment in a series co-sponsored by the Avalon Foundation, MCTV, and the Talbot Spy. Tonight, we continue to find the very best of the Midshore in the area of arts, culture, and public affairs. And we start with Easton resident, Washington College professor, and founder of the Institute for the Study of Religion, Politics, and Culture, Joseph Prud'homme. We talked to Joseph about the importance of looking at pressing issues of the day through the lens of religion and culture, and his efforts to develop programming to the general public to help with this aspiration.
A perfect example of this would be some work that I've been doing on historic views of Christian thought and slavery, looking at how actually anomalous it is that for a century and a half or so you had a deeply, maybe even less than a century and a half actually, you had a deep conviction among some that slavery was a good that was condoned by God. At the same time that that view was being articulated in the antebellum South, it was stridently condemned by conservative Christians elsewhere throughout the world, not just abolitionists and those opposed to slavery in the antebellum North, but also around the Christian world. And so looking at how that interpretation could take root, what were the cultural influences that made this, from the historical perspective, anomalous view take such deep root? Really, it wasn't until the 1820s that you have the theological defense of slavery as an actual positive theological good. Before that you have, well, it's permitted by Scripture but not consistent with the spirit of Scripture. But then the development of antebellum Southern views about slavery, which were very, very deeply held by some, unfortunately, and I think very misguided, but to look at the cultural context that how then does the Christian community more generally, it's a very diverse and broad community, come together after the Civil War when, of course, they had been so separated over these issues about how to read Scripture. And then one of the things I'm dealing with right now is the emergence of certain forms of biblical interpretation in the 1870s and 1880s, which are designed in part precisely to mend those fences. You may remember that in the 1830s, both in the early 1800s and again in the first part of the decade of the 1830s, Virginia, the Old Dominion, debated whether or not to implement by law gradual emancipation. So some people were thinking that slavery was going to eventually wither on the vine, but with the opening up of those very fertile areas in the southeast, then slavery was given a tremendous shot in the arm. So again, the abolitionists in part are reacting to this reemergence of what they call the slave power religion to take root. I'm not a preacher, I'm not a prophet, I'm just a professor. But as a professor, I want students to understand that history has been informed by religion and that the ways religion has informed our history have not been all uniformly bad. I just feel that these are issues of such importance that although I have the great good fortune to teach really, really good undergraduates, I am at an institution which prides itself, and rightly so, on having small classes, on having highly interactive experiences, mentoring relationships with a few students. Unhurried conversations, we call it, and we're rightly proud of it. However, as a result of that, the opportunity for me to engage others in these kinds of discussions is limited if it only takes place in the classroom. Right. So one thing that we can do by this study of the historic and ongoing contributions of religion to public life is to learn from our mistakes. All right? But how do we do that in a positive way? I think partly we have to learn to listen to each other. And I think that the wealth of spiritual traditions with respect to listening to the voice of God, that still quiet voice, as Hebrew Bible refers to it as, to listen to God as a spiritual discipline, we can drive empowerment for our public discourse from that tradition of spiritual disciplines, because we need to quiet ourselves and open ourselves to hearing other people and their viewpoints, because this polarization is breeding vilification. One of the most common phrases in Scripture is, "Be not afraid." We need to be not afraid to listen to other people. And when Black Lives Matter's leaders say they don't want to talk about anyone but Black lives, there's a tendency, and I can understand where it comes from, to think, but of course other lives matter too. Aren't you being narrow-minded? And then a kind of fearfulness can emerge about it, that this is saying something that is radical, namely that other lives don't matter, right? But to have the courage to just listen rather than to build a wall and block their voices out, right? So we say, well, look, no, actually they're not saying white lives don't matter. We listen to what they're saying. They're saying there hasn't been enough attention to this issue. So I do think that the spiritual discipline of listening to God can be transferable to the political and civic discipline that we need to listen to the voices of others. And it's not necessarily easy. Now, this walk, the walk of opening oneself up to another, this walk has to be genuinely open to going in a variety of directions. In other words, there is a tendency to, unfortunately, vilify those who support Trump, right? And I think, and so it has to be a walk where you're being guided by a sense of charity and not by some preconceived prejudice or some commitment which won't allow you to change course at all. And increasingly, this polarization is a polarization that's not just of the right vilifying the left, it's very much of the left vilifying the right as well.
I see that.
The Institute not only has its Distinguished Speaker Series, which takes place both on campus and increasingly, as I mentioned to you, here in Talbot County, it also has a peer-reviewed book series with an internationally prominent academic press. We're publishing extensively interesting and I think highly impactful volumes through that series. We also have summer internship opportunities for students, and one thing that I would like is for anyone who would be interested to be in touch with me if they know of interesting internship opportunities for students, especially opportunities in faith-based social service organizations. We also are doing programs overseas. So I have a strong connection with the University of Oxford. We'll be taking students not only to Oxford, as I've done for the last 10 years, this summer, but also going to Auschwitz, which will be a very, very important experience. And so what I would like is for individuals to know that this is a resource, and this is a resource that's available for them.
Next up, cars. As you may know, the SPY loves cars, and we were thrilled to learn about the creation of the Classic Motor Museum in St. Michael's, spearheaded by a team of dedicated volunteers. One member of that team is Tad DuPont, Jr., and we caught up with him on the grounds of the new museum to understand more about these exciting plans in the near future.
It's taken hold. It started in 2010-ish. I was a commissioner.
Right.
You know, the town was slipping. It's slipping now. It's back into a slipping now stage. And the economic developer from Talbot County came to the commissioners and whoever wanted to come and talked about, we are working on programs to, you know, stimulate the economy and create more jobs and all this stuff. And this all sort of came about from that. You know, we all decided we wanted a barn for the exhibit hall, and this fellow that we had teamed up with a little bit, Jay Hine, who lives in Oxford, had his barn built by this Amish company up in New Holland. And so we went down there and looked at the barn in Oxford, and I walked in, and some of the ladies walked in, and it's like, that's it. That's it. There's no question. We had a number of starts and stops, but it finally, we tried to do it by the library and that didn't work. We tried to go by where the community center is, that didn't work, and it finally wound up here. And it was the town zoning inspector's recommendation. Tad, why don't you go up to that field in the mill? Don't you and your brother control that? I said, yes. He said, well, the zoning is okay. I mean, the barn is $390,000 bucks.
Yeah,
Plus
more. Wow.
Plus the foundation was another 65.
I would too.
So by having the barn for the reception and making that happen, all of a sudden people believed. Like, wow, this is the barn you're talking about? It's not one of those metal Butler barns? No, it's this one. I'll put my car in this barn. We had, not last summer, but the summer before, Porsche, Mini Cooper, and Sunbeam all called about having a rally here, and they want to have it during the week. They don't want to be here on the weekend because it's too busy, so they want to come, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which is really a very good economic driver for town because you've got 25 Porsches, there's 25 rooms, there's 25 suppers 3 times. You lay out a course for them, and when they come back, they have their social, and they pay you something for it. I mean, all this stuff we've done, we owe $332,500. So we've got 6 people, families, that secured CDs at Talbot Bank and allowed us to borrow against it for 30 months. And the bank charged us 2% over what the CDs are paying, which is nothing. So our interest rate is 2.35%, and we have a fellow here in town that runs a B&B that is paying the interest.
Wow.
Every month. It's automatically deposited. He pays the interest every month for 30 months. That's his contribution.
Wow.
So we have 2.5 years to get up to speed. Now, we've had this discussion at the board. We need to have it every time there's a board meeting, that after the first year, we got to start chunking down on it.
Well, no matter what the theater project is, the SPY is always eager to reconnect with one of our favorite thespians in Talbot County, St. Michael's John Norton. With his tremendous stage presence and his remarkable stage direction of community theater, John has created quite a fan base who is always interested in what he takes on with the Tread Avon players. There is a good chance they will not be disappointed in John's latest project when he directs The Cemetery Club, the award-winning play written by Ivan Merchant at the Oxford Community Center over the next few weekends. The SPY caught up with John at the Bullet House to talk about the play and what he loves so much about it.
Tapped, Tread Avon Players is doing 4 comedies this year. And so I'm leading off with the February show, the cold wintertime slot. And so in looking for a show for that slot, I wanted something that was light and warm and bright to dispel the dark and cold winter evening. It's about 3 widows who get together once a month, and then they have tea together, and then they go for an afternoon stroll to the cemetery where their husbands are buried, and they give their husbands the latest news. So it takes place in largely in a cemetery, and what's not funny about that? It's about 3 friends who explore their friendship, their love and their loyalty and their respect for one another, and the friction that sometimes causes, and then how that becomes resolved. I don't want to give anything away, but it has a very heartfelt, deeply affecting, at least to me, emotional resolution to it that is very thoughtful and makes the evening worthwhile. The way I channel the characters is by casting. I think that 90% of directing is casting. And Tread Avon Players has a fabulous community of excellent actors. I was able to cast the show with 5 just terrific actors. Lynn Sanchez, who plays the flamboyant Lucille, Susan Patterson, who plays the staunch, sort of rigid Doris, and she creates a wonderful character. And then Maggie Gary plays the character Ida, and she's the one who's kind of mousy, but might be interested in some new adventures in her life. And then Brian McGonigal plays the male lead, and then Annie Dietz plays the woman that turns everything upside down. And it's a small part, but she's perfect. There's a lot for the soul in a good comedy, and that's why I like Cemetery Club, is because the laughs are there. We've got some laugh out loud moments. And then there's some other moments when, I think there's going to be a tear or two. And that will be very emotionally satisfying. So people will walk away from this show on a cold winter evening with a warm spot in their heart, and that's what we're after.
While it is sometimes easy to forget that homelessness exists even on the mid-shore, no one involved with Talbot Interfaith Shelter, whose mission is to support the homeless in this county, has that kind of memory loss. And that is certainly the case with Easton lawyer Robert Messick. Robert will be taking 6 months off this year to walk the entire length of the Appalachian Trail as a fundraiser for this organization. And we talked to him about his passion for the shelter's work and how he is planning this extraordinary adventure.
The Appalachian Trail, even though there's a lot of remote areas, it also goes through towns. And some of them down the middle of this main street is where the trail's going. And that's kind of interesting to me. It's said that it's fun to go visit through the towns, but also meeting people along the way. I think especially with my sleep system, the hammock, I wanted to be able to have more flexibility. If you use a tent, you are limited to campsites or places where it's flat ground.
Oh.
And there are not that many along the trail. There are the shelters, and then usually there's a clearing around the shelter where you could pitch a tent. But that forces you to hike from shelter to shelter, or even stop early, so you lose out on extra time you could be hiking. So with the tent or the hammock, I could pitch it anywhere there are at least, say, 2 trees. So, I can hike longer hours that way, and I could set up closer to water sources,
But
away from the crowds and the noise.
Yeah.
But I have been volunteering over the years through the UUFE, that's a Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Easton. So along with the other partner congregations, they used to take turns before they had this great spot here to have the facilities for housing the homeless. So I would volunteer at nights where they needed a volunteer to assist the staff member, and it was not hard work. It was mainly just sleeping on a cot.
Yeah.
But I did get to hang around and visit with the people that were using the facilities and get to know them a little bit. And sometimes I'd talk about why they were there and the misfortunes they ran into.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it could happen to anyone, really.
Sad.
I was teaching yoga at the Talbot County Senior Center, and this fellow would come in every day to watch the TV, but he would sleep in his car at night. And he'd often park out by the airport on Route 50, and I don't know that he had to do that. For some people it seems like it's a choice, but
I mean, there are
usually the ones that I'd see coming here when it was at the other facilities, it was more families, parents and children. It's really sad that they have to be in that situation.
Yeah.
And do you have a kind of financial goal in mind?
Figuring about mid-April.
Okay. So
And it'll be starting at Springer Mountain in Georgia. So I'll need to travel down there and then take off. We haven't worked out all the details, but I think one of the plans is to offer for people to join me along the way. Like it to be on a condition that they would bring in their own sponsors to help broaden the donation base for the fundraiser.
Wouldn't that be a great idea? Yeah.
So I don't expect anybody to go all the way,
Yeah.
or maybe even just a day hike on the other end of it, but the people that would have their own equipment that can do it, I'm willing for them to come along with me.
Our fifth selection for the month is a story about the fastest growing sport in the country. It's called pickleball. Yes, pickleball. And our own YMCA is a fine example about how this wiffle ball-based game is taking over the nation by storm. We talked to Nick Papson about the history of the game and how it's played.
Pickleball is, believe it or not, 50 years old. Two friends in Bainbridge Island, Washington, who had been golfing, and they came home one day and their kids were all moping around the house. They said, "Guys, get out of the house. We don't have anything to do." So the parents, these two guys, said, "No, we'll figure something out." So they went around the house and started looking at stuff. And they said, "We got a badminton court out there. We have a wiffle ball. We have ping pong paddles. Come on, we're going outside." And just kind of made it all up as they went. And then 50 years later, it's now the fastest growing game in the United States. They just built 43 courts in Naples to host the U.S. Open last year. When they have a tournament, a big tournament, they'll get 1,000 people playing. Over 2 million people are playing pickleball, and they think in the next 5 years it'll go to about 8 million people. It's a very social game. Since a game to 11 might last 15 minutes, so there's a lot of camaraderie around the court. And the beauty is a good player, a really good player, and a beginner can have an equally good time, if their minds are wrapped around the fact that that's what they want to do. See that we'll have men playing with women, two women against two men. It really doesn't matter. Games are short. You play the game and then you move on to the next game. We have probably 60 to 70 in Easton that we communicate with on an ongoing basis and at one time or another played. We probably have 25 to 30 that play fairly regularly. With the acquisition of Cross Court, we think we're going to access a whole different crowd because we're going to be able to do it at night and on the weekends. Friday nights we're going to start playing. So a lot of people have a racket sport background. Yeah. But we also have people that never played a racket sport at all, and they come out there and they love it because it's not an intimidating game. It's something you can pick up and learn and have fun with.
And finally, we leave you with our community message special interest program, where we highlight special projects and programs that are going on this month. And this month, in February, we're talking about the field of mediums. And we have with us, talking about this very unique field, Debbie Wojciechowski, in advance of her appearance at the Stoltz Room at the Avalon on February 25th. I think you'll enjoy it.
I'm actually a medium. Are you familiar with mediumship? I am a medium, and in summary, all mediums are naturally psychic. Psychics are not medium. It's two very different things. Psychic reading would be this lifetime only, past, present, and future, whereas mediumship is connection with the other side. Basically called spirit. So spirit would be your loved ones who have passed over.
So did you get special training for this? I mean, how did you come to realize that you had this intuitive sense, and do you actually go and develop it someplace?
Excellent question. I believe all mediums know that they're mediums when you really do, and I've both. I believe at the age of 13, when I had a near-death experience in Ocean City, Maryland, I was caught in an undercurrent, and after that, By the age of 21, I had lost both parents and most relatives.
Oh, gee.
Came from a very large Polish Catholic family. So I was asking God rather rhetorically, where did everyone go?
Yeah.
And I started getting the gift of mediumship and sort of like, I'm just kidding, Took the more traditional route and worked 4 jobs to go to college and grad school. And went to University of Baltimore for my undergrad, Johns Hopkins for my graduate in business, and worked for the federal government for 25 years in federal law enforcement. So this has always been a part of who I am. I've decided, to do it professionally the last 5 years.
So that's interesting on many fronts, but you had this inclination very early on, and then you kind of went with the kind of traditional route, but this was always going on anyway. I guess
Yes.
you can't turn it off, right?
Yes and no. And a lot of people ask me that. You can turn it on and off. And in Baltimore, there's really no place, formally to go to study. However, I was very fortunate to find a mentor that I started studying meditation, mediumship at a very young age. And she would have mediums from England come over and visit. And we were taught the formal way, which is from England. And Dave, in England, mediumship is very common. Very, very common. In fact, it's still the most common in England than any other place worldwide.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because in doing my own family research, I realized that, as you probably know, death was really big in the 19th century, the end of the 19th
Yes.
century. And this is where I think a lot of people started to seek out mediums and trying to kind of reconnect with their family. And in the case of Chicago, they lost so many people to disease. Death was a very big part of the Chicago legacy. And this was a way to talk to children and talk to parents. And so it was very popular. And then, at least in this country, it kind of fizzled away a bit, didn't it?
Yes and no. In the last perhaps 10, 12 years, I know Sylvia Brown was very well known. Initially, she would be on the Montel Williams show. John Edwards had a show crossing over. James Van Prague, not well known, but on TV, but a well known. I believe that persons know they are a medium, but there is formal study. And Lisa Williams was from England, and so I studied extensively with her for 3 years, and we were tested extensively. We were tested a lot on our abilities.
Yeah, no, so that's an interesting part in itself. How does one get tested in this?
For mediumship?
Yeah, because, and I think we almost have to back up and
Sure.
say, if I came to you
For a
as a
reading?
client, and I said, I would like to get in touch with the other side.
Sure.
There is a intake, there's a kind of preliminary
Sure.
interview.
Not necessarily an interview, but if you were interested in coming to me for a reading, and let's say that you have a significant person in spirit who's passed, a grandmother, and the example would be her name was Mary, for the example, and this is the person that you really wanted to come through or hear from. As a reputable medium, I cannot guarantee anything. No reputable medium can. However, I guarantee that I will do the very best I can. So my question, or I would ask you, please, if you could just be open in the reading. I really encourage healthy skepticism. I think people should have a healthy skepticism. There's a lot of people out there that are not reputable, but I just ask to have an open mind. And John Edward was interviewed recently, and someone asked him, when is the best time for a client to have a reading? And his answer was great. He said, whenever the client is open to whomever comes through. So this is not necessarily your immediate family. This could be a next door neighbor. This could be your best friend's mom who passed. It could be a co-worker's loved one who passed.
So, in many ways, when you say getting to the other side, you're there, and whoever shows up that is connected to your client
Yes.
comes up. So
Yes.
you can't just say, I'm sorry, I'm just looking for this guy's mother.
No.
You are just facilitating a bridge, so to speak.
Exactly. I'm the mediator. And I feel that I really believe that I'm simply the mediator, and that when I do a reading for someone and their loved ones come through, I highly encourage them to absolutely remember that when their loved ones come through, they're around the client. I'm simply the mediator, and that they're around them. They say they're 7 to 10 feet away, and that the client be open to whomever comes through. Very, very important. I'm very humbled by this work, and I went into doing it full time with extreme hesitation and trepidation because of the immense responsibility that's involved when giving a reading and giving a message, and representing your loved ones on the other side and delivering the message to you in a respectful manner. I also have a background in grief and counseling. I worked as a volunteer at Hospice of Baltimore for 8 years,
Oh, no kidding.
running support groups. So that has been instrumental in my work as a medium.
Oh, wow. That's a totally different angle altogether.
Mhm.
So maybe you could just describe, if you would, there's probably no typical reading, but maybe some stories about how this worked out well for some people, where they've been able to get resolution or a feeling of closure or even a sense of continuity.
Absolutely, and every reading is different, every client is different, and your loved ones on the other side would be different. Unfortunately, I've met with many parents that have lost children to substance abuse, particularly in the last 7 to 8 years. And to be able to bring a sense of closure to a parent who's lost a child, I think that in spirit, they want their loved ones to know that they are safe and happy, and that their loved ones will see them again, particularly with a grieving parent. I also work on cold cases, which is an unresolved, investigation.
Nice.
And working on a cold case, I may be able to confirm to the parents whom I believe was responsible. However, that does not necessarily equate with a conviction.
I see.
But there's a saying by John Edward, and I love it. It says that it's less important to let others know how amazing you are than to know how great it feels to be able to leave a client with peace and hope that their loved ones are, safe and happy.
And how often does that happen if you
When I do readings?
if you totaled up all the people that you've worked with, 70% walk away feeling?
I've done over 4,500 readings, and I have a 95% return rate. I'm not real big on patting myself on the shoulder. I'm humbled that I have the clients, and basically, Dave, I built this business word of mouth.
Yeah.
I built it word of mouth the old-fashioned way, and said a prayer that if it's meant to work out, it will. And I recommend clients not to return back for a year.
Yeah.
I think they should wait at least a year. And so if you had a reading with me and you were satisfied, then you would tell your friend, and they tell their friend. So that's basically, how I built up the business.
How did this impact your law enforcement work?
I believe we all
Were
have
you in
basically
homicide?
intuition.
That would have been in the national.
All right. I believe I've always used my intuition. Absolutely, and I think we all have basic intuition.
Yeah,
I just think that some persons are a little bit higher.
I see.
I worked in the government is very conservative, so I didn't do this, full time. And actually, unless someone's given me permission for a reading, I would not walk up to a stranger. I would not sit here right now and give you a reading without your permission. I think it's unethical and immoral.
Yeah.
So unless someone's given me their permission for a reading. So I've never been to a restaurant or walking down the street or anything like that. But I think it's been a part of, it's the best way to describe it, Dave, is that it's very natural to me. So sometimes when something is natural, you don't realize it's a gift or an ability.
Yeah.
My best friend is a chef. Very, very natural for her to make any type of dish. I'm not so good in the kitchen,
Yeah.
but she doesn't realize that she's got this great ability because it's part of who she is. It's natural.
Yeah.
So I believe that when something is natural to us, we don't realize it's a gift.
Do you feel like there's a third dimension? Do you believe in ghosts? Do you feel like...
Good question. There's a lot of controversy about ghosts. So is it the ghost, if there was someone who had been in this room before, where we're sitting now, and is now passed, and in spirit, and someone says, I believe I saw, so-and-so who is passed, is it a ghost or the energetic imprint of? I think, every person, every object has energy.
No, I got you.
And it's basically, mediumship 101 in training, it's psychometry. Every object has energy to which it's been exposed. So, my watch, if a medium or psychic picked up my watch and when you're first starting to train, they could pick up, who I was from the watch. That was one of the ways that, a lot of people starting out train.
I feel like some of the stigma's gone away.
I hope so. And
do you sense
I hope
that?
so.
I agree. It was. I don't know if it was negative, but it was in
I think it was
kind
pretty
of in
negative.
that kooky
Yes.
category, right?
I researched a lot of it on my own, just to see, having a background, in criminal justice, and that's a whole nother story. But yes, there are certain groups of persons who would have done this for not the right reason, and I believe that. People will say, oh, they're going to a psychic or a medium, or if I walk into a room and, people look at me very curiously, it's not good or bad, there's the medium. And they start whispering, there's the medium. No, it's been great. I loved what I did in my other job. I love what I do now, and I think my entire life was stepping stones to this.
Yeah.
And if you're a medium or not. You really do.
Does it bother you sometimes to be so vulnerable to this other channel, so to speak?
That's a great question, Dave. And I was at an event actually nearby recently in Easton, and after the event, someone said to me, it's amazing, what a wonderful gift. And I said yes and no. And again, going back to the responsibility and the way you deliver the message, so it is a huge responsibility and ramifications. And it's so much a part of who I am and so natural that, and at the end of the day, when I meet a client, and I've met amazing people from all walks of life, and finishing a reading and, they give me a hug and, you may have touched their heart or changed their life. When all is said and done, that's what it's all about. And I truly believe that.
How did it work with hospice before we close up? I'm
Sure.
interested in that angle too.
I worked with Gilchrist in Baltimore. I was actually a volunteer grief counselor for 8 years. I did 6-week ongoing support groups. And it was great for a learning bench for me for grief and loss. And they were primarily young widows and widower support groups, and so I have a strong background in grief and loss.
But did you connect the two? Or
Oh, no.
There was a separation.
Unless I'm working.
I misunderstood. Okay.
Yes, unless I'm working, and no, I was working full-time in law enforcement then. No, unless I'm actually working and someone asks me, I would not, I don't think it's appropriate. They would need to ask my permission, or I would say I want the request. You understand what I'm saying?
What's the connection with the Eastern Shore?
Oh, we could talk for
Baltimore gal that you are.
Actually, Bobby Parlay, who is the owner of in St. Michael's, Simpatico, has become a very good friend of mine in the past several years. And she's been working with me a lot recently. I actually go to Cape May several times a year, one of the bed and breakfasts, and so I'm doing larger events, and so that's my connection.
And you're going to be in St. Michael's coming up, right?
Yes, I will be in February 25th, Saturday at the Avalon. I'll be doing a 2-hour platform event of mediumship. I'm very, very excited for the opportunity.
What does that mean? You said
for a 2-hour event?
Yeah.
Actually, so for 2 hours, I will probably do, and I hate to give an exact, but say 8 to 12, 13 people. And I will give messages, readings to those people who are open to it. And although not everyone is going to, time-wise be able to get a reading, I really believe it's an extraordinary opportunity for everyone present, all the participants, to have a better understanding of what mediumship is.
Yeah.
And I also explain, if I'm giving someone a reading and say, can you connect with, and I believe your loved one smoked, you could smell the smell of smoke, that's a sign from your loved one. Or if you find coins, there's like 7 or 8 basic signs that everyone can connect with. And to tell everyone in the audience that although I'm reading one person here, look out for these signs and know that your loved ones are around you also, and open up the awareness of mediumship in a really healthy way.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Let's
I
continue
really
the
appreciate.
conversation. Yeah.
Sure, I really appreciate
thank you.
the opportunity to interview me, and I appreciate Bobby giving me this, and I look forward to the Avalon. This was great.